It had rained and rained and rained in the Blue Ridge Mountains the last time the great Uma awakened. Sometimes it takes 300 years for enough water to reach the underground caverns where the great amphibian lies sleeping. It had been so long since the last time that all the witnesses were long gone, as were their children's children. And because they had forgotten to tell their stories, the legend of Uma died with them. She was born in the dawn of time, when the mist hung low to the ground, and the lakes and the rivers were filled to overflowing with the birthing waters of life. Once, creatures as large as Uma were as common as houseflies. But now she was the last of her kind, and she had grown old. And this would be her last awakening. And if enough water did not fall soon, she would not be able to spawn, and her kind would be lost forever. Now, the men who came to the mountain now, they did not believe in legends or awakenings, and no amount of frantic pecking on their cell phones would explain her appearance when she rose from the mountain, or provide the antidote to the slime that she would use to digest them. The men had forgotten about Uma, but the animals remembered. And when the heavy storms of spring continued into summer, the mountain lion, the bear, and the deer, they grew restless, nervous. And as those heavy storms of summer became more and more severe, and more rain fell upon the mountain, the lion, the bear, and the deer fled, because they remembered deep in their DNA the slaughter that had ensued after the last awakening. It rained so hard that the mountain face itself became a waterfall, just like it had in the very beginning. The air was gray with rain, and that waterfall began to trickle into crevices that had not tasted rain for maybe 300 years. And the waters that trickled became the feeder system for an underground riverbed that led into a dark cavern and then into a dry underground lake where the great Uma lay sleeping. And as the rains continued to pour through the crevices, the lake waters began to rise and lap against her parched red and black skin. And Uma opened her great yellow eyes. She was awake. And the caverns themselves began to sing to her, Uma, Uma, wake now, wake now, Uma, Uma, wake now, wake now. Uma lifted her great head from the sand and rolled her long neck and drank deeply of the primordial waters. It had been so long, and she was very thirsty. Uma, Uma, drink now, drink now. Uma, Uma, drink now, drink now. She pulled first one foot and then the other from the sandy bottom, and she stretched her skin and tendons for the first time in nearly 300 years. And then she sent her great forked tongue out, asking questions of the air itself. Was there enough moisture? Yes. She touched her skin. Was the acid rising? Yes. Yes. She could finally rise and feed. Uma, Uma, rise now, rise now. Uma, Uma, rise now, rise now. As she pulled herself out of the lake bed and began climbing up that underground river, 3 scientists from the National Weather Service arrived on the mountain. PhDs all, scientists from the Climate Control Center in Asheville. And none of them had ever seen anything like this rain. They had searched all the archives. There was nothing like it on record, and the records went back 150 years. So they had been sent to the mountain to record the great storms. They parked in a shed and went in and had a meal of greasy hamburgers and French fries with the rangers, traded jokes about the weather, before heading out into the pounding rain to set up camp. Cell phones weren't working. Their computers weren't working. There was no cell service or Wi-Fi on the top of the mountain. And the rain stopped just long enough for the men to set up camp before another round of rain pounded their tent. As they set up their gauges and instruments to record the storms, the barometric pressure went off the charts. And underneath them, Uma was making her way up that underground riverbed, and the ground was already shaking under the weight of her huge, moist body. Uma, Uma, feed now, feed now. Uma, Uma, feed now, feed now. The scientists tossed a coin to see who would have to go out into the pounding rain and work with the gauges first. Dr. Randall lost, the senior scientist. So he suited up and went out into the rain. And when he first felt the earth shuddering, he assumed it was thunder reverberating off the mountain. He did not know to expect her. He did not know what was coming. Until suddenly, a crack appeared in the earth, and he saw her eye. His foot slipped on her slime, and suddenly he was within her mouth before he could do anything, not even scream. And Uma pushed her way up through that portal to the ancient above ground and spit out his wristwatch and kept going. Uma, Uma, feed now, feed now. Uma, Uma, feed now, feed now. Meanwhile, back in the tent, the youngest scientist, Dr. Jones, realized that Dr. Randall had left an important piece of equipment. It was the ceiling projector, the machine that they used to measure the height of the clouds in a storm. And so he put on his rain gear and grabbed the piece of equipment and headed out into the pounding rain. It was an act of courage just to keep his eyes open in the pelting rain. And everything was wet, the ground, his clothes. So when he first felt her slime, he assumed it was mud, until she snagged his legs and pulled him into herself, and his scream disappeared into the low-hanging mist. Uma, Uma, feed now, feed now. Uma, Uma, feed now, feed now. Uma, Uma, feed now, feed now. She cleared the entire mountaintop with a sweep of her great tail and snapped towering hemlocks like matchsticks. And when she tore open the tent, you should have seen the look on Johnson's face. He screamed and ran as fast as he could to the ranger station. He just couldn't run fast enough. Uma, Uma, feed now, feed now. Uma, Uma, feed now, feed now. Uma, Uma, feed now, feed now. She was in a feeding frenzy. The rangers heard him screaming. They ran out, and when they saw her swallow him whole, they ran to their trucks and grabbed their bear rifles and began shooting at her. The camp dog ran and growled at her, and she snapped him up like an appetizer. They shot her eyes out. But it didn't matter, because she was blind from her life in the caverns. And she didn't use her eyes to hunt. She used her tongue to find mammal pheromones. And it wasn't long before she found the men who had shot at her and those who hadn't. It didn't matter. Uma, Uma, feed now, feed now. Uma, Uma, feed now, feed now. In a few minutes, it was all over. She had consumed every man on the mountaintop, spitting out only the wood and the metal. Filled to the brim with the men she had eaten, she drug her huge body back to the underground riverbed, descended it, and closed the portal to the ancient above world with one big flip of her tail. And boulders cut loose by the rain fell in and began to close up the portal that led to her underground home. She crawled down the riverbed, through the cavern, into the big underground lake. She nudged herself into the soft sand and buried herself up to her snout. At last, she could spawn. Uma, Uma, spawn now, spawn now. Uma, Uma, spawn now, spawn now. She released her one egg into herself and fertilized it, knowing that as it grew, it would consume her and grow larger and larger, feeding upon her, until one day it would burst forth from her sarcophagus. And then her child would sleep until the next great rain brought the awakening. And satisfied that her kind would continue, she closed her great yellow eyes. Uma, Uma, sleep now, sleep now. Uma, Uma, sleep now, sleep now. Above her, the destruction was horrific. The loss of men and machinery was scientifically attributed to an earthquake, which had been felt for miles away. And as the mountaintop lay littered with debris of houses and ranger stations, cell phones, computers, rifles, wristwatches, in the underground lake deep beneath them, the great ancient amphibian drew her last breath. Uma, Uma, rest now, rest. rest now. Uma, uma, rest now, rest now, die. Thank you. Thank you very much.